The music was soft, the scent of white roses heavy in the air, but none of it could drown out the sharp twist of nerves inside me. I stood awkwardly near the back of the ceremony hall, clutching my small purse with both hands, feeling the walls closing in. Everyone else was dressed like they had walked straight out of a magazine. Every smile looked polished. Every laugh felt rehearsed. And me? I felt like the outsider they had forgotten to leave outside. I caught my mother's gaze across the tables. Her lips curled in a way that made my stomach drop. She leaned closer to my aunt, whispering something behind a manicured hand. I didn't have to hear it to know it wasn't kind. Then, as if just to make sure her message was fully delivered, she turned her eyes on me and rolled them, slow and exaggerated, like I was something sticky on the bottom of her heel. Before I could look away, she moved toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She didn't smile. She didn't hug. She just leaned in, her perfume so strong it made my eyes water. "Don't expect a seat at our table," she whispered, her voice cutting like a knife wrapped in silk. Then she smiled sweetly and walked away, like she hadn't just punched a hole through my chest. I stood there frozen, blinking rapidly, willing myself not to cry. Not here.
Not in front of them.
I wanted to leave. I wanted to disappear, so badly my skin itched. But something rooted me to the floor. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was something even deeper, the stubborn, bruised part of me that had been surviving their coldness for far too long. The ceremony was starting. The music swelled, and all heads turned to watch the bride walk in, radiant and glowing. I tried to blend into the background, shrinking myself smaller and smaller, hoping no one would notice me standing alone like a forgotten coat rack. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as the groom, Oliver, my cousin's fiancé, took her hand at the altar, he paused. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Oliver turned his head. His eyes searched the crowd like he was looking for someone. Then they locked onto mine. A ripple of confusion spread through the guests. Whispers stirred like dry leaves on pavement. Without a word, he let go of the bride's hand and started walking toward me. I froze. My heart jackhammered in my chest. Was I dreaming? Was this some awful joke? He stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the sincerity blazing in his eyes. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "I think before we go any further today, everyone here deserves to know who she really is." Every head turned. Every eye bored into me. I wanted to sink into the floor. I wanted to vanish. But Oliver wasn't done. He turned to the crowd, voice steady, proud. "She's not just some relative you push into the shadows. She's the reason I'm standing here today. Without her, I wouldn't even be alive."
Gasps.
Shocked murmurs. My mother's face drained of color. She grabbed the back of a chair for support. Oliver smiled warmly at me, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. Real, genuine, without a trace of mockery. "She's family. And today, I'm making sure she knows that in front of everyone." He turned back to the officiant, still standing there wide-eyed, and added, "I'd like her to sit at the front, please. She belongs with us." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Tears blurred my vision, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Belonging. Oliver extended his hand toward me, patient and sure. And for the first time in years, I let myself reach back. The guests parted like a wave as he led me to the front row, past the stunned faces of my family, past the cold stares that suddenly didn't seem to matter anymore. I didn't care about the whispers anymore. I didn't care about the judgment. Because someone finally saw me. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen. As I walked with Oliver to the front row, every step felt like a battlefield one. Not through anger, not through shouting, but through being recognized for once for something real. The bride, Amelia, smiled when she saw me. It wasn't a fake, forced thing like the others wore. It was a smile that reached her eyes. She nodded slightly, as if telling me, "It's okay. You belong here." My knees felt like jelly as I sat down. I smoothed the skirt of my plain navy dress, the one I had almost not worn because it looked too cheap compared to the glitz around me. But somehow now, none of that seemed important. My mother's table was 3 rows behind mine now. I caught her glaring at me, her mouth twisted into a tight, fake smile when someone turned to glance at her reaction. For once, she had no words. And maybe, just maybe, I realized I didn't need her words anymore. The ceremony resumed, but the energy in the room had changed. You could feel it. It was heavier, like everyone was holding their breath, wondering what had just happened. As Amelia and Oliver exchanged vows, I sat quietly, my heart pounding in my ears, trying to absorb the moment. A memory flickered, uninvited, through my mind. A day years ago when Oliver had shown up at my small, crumbling apartment with a bloody nose and a black eye. He had been 17. I was 22. His father, my uncle, had been furious with him over something trivial, and when Oliver stood up for himself, fists had flown. He had nowhere else to go. No one else he trusted. I had opened my door without a second thought. Gave him an ice pack,
A couch to sleep on.
a shoulder to lean on when he cried, and said he couldn't do it anymore. He had stayed for 3 nights, and when he left, he hugged me and whispered, "Someday, I'll pay you back." I had smiled, thinking he was just saying it to be polite. I had told him, "You don't owe me anything." Funny how life circles back. The ceremony ended with cheers and applause. Amelia and Oliver kissed under the twinkling lights, and the room softened, filling again with warmth. But this time, it wasn't a warmth I was left out of. Oliver stayed close as they walked back down the aisle, and when he passed my row, he squeezed my hand quickly, a small, grateful gesture. Later, during the reception, the seating chart had to be adjusted. Of course, it caused ripples. I caught snippets of conversations around me. Who does she think she is? That girl? At the front. I thought she was the black sheep. But they were only whispers. No one dared say it out loud. Because the groom, the golden boy, had made his choice clear. While people drifted toward the open bar and the dance floor, I slipped outside onto the terrace. I needed a minute to breathe, to steady my shaking hands. The sun was setting, painting the sky in pinks and oranges that looked almost too beautiful to be real. I leaned against the balcony, closing my eyes, letting the cool evening breeze wash over me. Footsteps approached behind me. For a second, I braced myself, expecting another blow, another wound disguised as a smile. But it was Amelia. She stepped beside me, her veil trailing softly in the wind. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light but kind. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat.
Yeah.
I didn't expect any of that. She smiled, looking out over the hills. Neither did I. But Oliver, he's been waiting for today to tell everyone. I frowned, confused. She turned to me, her eyes clear and steady. "You changed his life," she said simply. "You gave him a safe place when he needed it most. He told me everything." I bit my lip hard to keep the tears from falling again. "I didn't do anything special," I whispered. "Anyone would have." "No," she interrupted gently. "Not anyone would have. Family doesn't always mean safe. You were his family when no one else was." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever described me that way before. Amelia touched my arm. "I'm glad you're here. We both are." Then she leaned in, laughing a little. "Besides, you're the only one here who's actually real. I needed at least one sane person at this wedding." I laughed, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly from deep inside me. Maybe for the first time in years, I let it happen without guilt. We stood there together, 2 women from completely different worlds, bound not by blood, but by something stronger. Kindness, gratitude, respect. Inside, the DJ started the first dance. Amelia winked at me. "Come on. Let's not give them the satisfaction of thinking they ran you off." She linked her arm through mine, pulling me back toward the glowing lights and music. As I walked beside her, I realized something. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about knowing I never needed their approval in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest seat at any table I could ever have. The reception hall buzzed with energy as the music played on, but under it all, I could still feel the stares. Some were curious. Some were skeptical. Some resentful. But none of it touched me anymore. I sat at the front table, a place I never would have dared to dream of, right beside the newlyweds. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, walked past once, shooting me a look sharp enough to cut glass. But she quickly looked away when Oliver caught her glare and smiled at me in return. It was surreal, like living inside someone else's dream. I picked at the edge of the tablecloth, trying to stay small even though I knew, deep down, it was too late for that now. No matter how invisible I tried to be, Oliver had made sure everyone saw me. During the dinner, Oliver stood and clinked his glass lightly with a fork. The room hushed immediately. I froze. Another speech? He cleared his throat, looking at Amelia with so much love it was hard to watch without feeling it settle in your own chest. And then he turned to me. "I owe my life to a lot of people," he began, his voice strong but tender. "But there's one person here tonight who probably doesn't realize just how much she changed my life." My chest tightened painfully. "Years ago, when things at home were dark," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "I had nowhere to go. No one I could trust."
He paused.
Let the silence stretch. And then, he said, voice cracking slightly, "This amazing person opened her door. She didn't ask questions. She didn't judge. She just gave me a place to breathe." Oliver's eyes found mine across the table. And for a moment, it was like no one else existed. "If you ever wonder what real family looks like," he said, voice steady again, "it looks like kindness. It looks like someone choosing you, even when they don't have to." A few people shifted uncomfortably. I caught my mother's face in the corner of my vision, stiff, unreadable. "I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for her," Oliver finished. The whole room sat frozen for a second. Then, unexpectedly, someone started clapping. One person, then another, then another. The sound grew louder, richer, until it filled the hall completely. I sat there, overwhelmed, blinking hard against the sting behind my eyes. Not because I wanted attention, not because I needed validation, but because for the first time in my life, people were applauding not the person they wanted me to be, but the person I actually was. When the applause finally died down, I stood slowly, almost shaking, and gave a small nod. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I knew the tears would fall. Instead, I smiled, a real smile, the kind that rose from the deepest part of you, and sat back down. Oliver beamed at me, clinking his glass once more before turning back to Amelia, kissing the top of her hand. The rest of the evening felt like floating. People who had barely looked at me before came over, offering polite conversation. Some were awkward. Some were genuine. But all of it felt lighter, like a shift had happened that couldn't be undone. Later, during the bouquet toss, Amelia did something I never expected. She caught my eye across the dance floor and grinned mischievously. When she tossed the bouquet, it landed directly into my arms.
People laughed.
Clapped again. But this time, it wasn't mocking laughter. It was celebration. As I stood there clutching the flowers, stunned, Amelia winked at me from the dance floor. I laughed, shaking my head, feeling a kind of joy bloom in my chest that had nothing to do with marriage or weddings, and everything to do with being seen, being wanted, being loved. I caught my mother's eye once more across the room. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't clapping. She looked lost, like she was realizing she no longer held the strings she once pulled. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the bitter ache of needing her approval. I just felt free. Truly, finally free. As the night wore on, as people danced and laughed and celebrated around me, I realized something else. Maybe the tables I wasn't invited to. Maybe the doors slammed in my face. Maybe all of it had been leading here. To the table I was always meant to sit at. To the people who didn't need blood to call me family. To the life I had quietly, stubbornly, fought for, even when no one was watching. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had never been invisible. They had simply chosen not to see.
And now? Now, they didn't have a choice.
The night blurred into a soft golden glow, laughter, music, and conversations flowing around me like a river. For once, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I was floating, riding the current instead of fighting it. Oliver and Amelia spent much of the evening dancing, laughing with friends, sneaking loving glances at each other that made even the coldest hearts in the room thaw a little. I watched them from the table, sipping my water, smiling quietly. Every so often, someone would stop by my seat, some familiar, some strangers. There was hesitation at first. Small talk. Awkward apologies hidden under compliments. It was fascinating, really, how quickly the world turned when one person decided you were worth seeing. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I just listened, smiled, and nodded. I knew most of them weren't coming from a place of deep change. But that wasn't my burden to carry. I had carried too many burdens that weren't mine for too long. Later in the evening, as the first stars began to scatter across the night sky, the DJ lowered the music and called for a family moment. Guests were encouraged to gather close, toasting the couple. Oliver took the microphone once more, but instead of talking about love or vows or tradition, he did something unexpected. He raised his glass, but his words weren't for Amelia this time. "I want to make one more toast," he said, scanning the crowd. His gaze settled on me again. I shook my head slightly, embarrassed, but he smiled and pressed on. "I want to toast the people in life who choose us. Not because they have to, not because blood says they should, but because they see something in us when we can't even see it ourselves." A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. "Family isn't just a last name," he said, voice clear and strong. "It's the people who show up, the ones who stay." He lifted his glass higher. "To the ones who stay," he finished simply. The guests around him, around me, raised their glasses too. "To the ones who stay," they echoed. And I sat there, stunned, the words hitting harder than any slap, any insult, any cold shoulder I had ever endured. Because for once, it wasn't about who had left. It was about who had stayed. Who had loved, quietly, stubbornly, without needing permission. I felt tears burning the back of my throat, but this time I didn't fight them. I let them fall, tiny rivers down my cheeks, unnoticed in the golden dim of the room. Amelia came over, wrapping her arms around me without a word. And somehow, her embrace said everything that words couldn't. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just survived my family's rejection. I had built something stronger in the empty spaces they left behind. Something real. Something unshakable. Something they couldn't take away, no matter how many times they rolled their eyes, whispered behind my back, or pretended I didn't exist. I didn't need a seat at their table. I had built my own. And it was full of people who saw me, really saw me, for exactly who I was. Later, after most of the guests had left and the fairy lights began to dim, Oliver found me again on the terrace. He leaned against the railing, hands stuffed into his pockets. "You doing okay?" he asked. I smiled, the kind that came from deep in the chest, the kind you didn't have to force. "I'm good," I said honestly. "Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded, glancing out at the stars. "You deserve tonight," he said quietly. I swallowed hard, blinking back a fresh wave of tears. "Thank you," I whispered. He bumped my shoulder gently. "You saved me once. Tonight was the least I could do." We stood there in silence for a long moment, the cool night air wrapping around us like a soft blanket. Finally, he grinned. "You know, Amelia and I are thinking about starting a business. Something real. Something we can build together." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And we want you to be part of it," he said simply. My mouth fell open slightly. "Me?" He laughed. "Yeah, you. You're smart, you're tough, and you've got more heart than half this room combined."
I didn't know what to say.
For so long, I had believed I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve good things, that kindness was something you gave, not something you received. But maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I was meant for more than just surviving. Maybe I was meant for living, thriving, building, loving. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I had always feared. I looked at Oliver, at the offer shining in his eyes, and felt something deep inside me shift. "I'd love that," I said finally, voice trembling but sure.
He smiled, relieved.
"Good. Because, honestly, we can't imagine doing it without you." As we walked back inside, the last strains of music playing soft and slow, I realized something.
I hadn't lost a family that day.
I had found one. And this time it was mine by choice, not by chance. The days after the wedding felt like waking up from a dream I didn't want to leave. But this dream was more than just a fleeting moment. It was a new life I hadn't expected to find. I was living it, and it was beautiful. Oliver's offer had changed everything. Not just for me, but for Amelia, too. The business we started, something small at first but steadily growing, was built on the foundation of mutual respect and shared goals. No one had to prove their worth. We all brought something unique, something needed. There were still moments of doubt. Old habits died hard. I caught myself sometimes wondering when it would all fall apart, when the truth that I was still the outsider would come crashing back in. But it never came. I had learned something important. The outside world's judgments only held weight if I allowed them to. I started volunteering my time to local charities, helping those who had been through struggles of their own. I was no longer doing it to gain approval or win anyone over. I was doing it because it felt good to give. Because I had something to give. And when I walked into the room with my head held high, no longer shrinking in the shadows, I saw it. The people who had once looked past me, ignored me, or worse, belittled me. They noticed. They saw me. The real me. Amelia and I grew closer. She and Oliver had made me an honorary member of their family, a place at their table, not because of blood, but because of choice. And that felt like home. But there was still one last piece of unfinished business. My mother. The woman who had spent so many years pretending I wasn't good enough. The woman who had humiliated me in front of others, making me feel invisible. Who had looked at me with disdain, rolled her eyes, whispered her cruelty under her breath. I had avoided her after the wedding, partly out of fear, partly out of a sense of self-preservation. But something had shifted in me, something that made me stop running. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to be scared of her judgment, because I had something to prove, not to her, but to myself. I stood outside her front door, hesitating for only a moment before I knocked. The door opened slowly. She stood there, eyes widening when she saw me. I wasn't sure what I expected her to say. Maybe a snide comment. Maybe silence. But what came next was a little different. Her voice trembled. "Why are you here?" I didn't hesitate. "I came to let you know that I'm doing well. That I've found my place in the world. I've found my family." She didn't respond right away. Her lips pressed tight, her brow furrowed in confusion. Then, unexpectedly, she stepped aside, allowing me into her house. I didn't know what had changed in her, but something had. For the first time, I wasn't just the disappointment. I wasn't the failure. I was the person I had always been beneath her judgment. She led me into the living room, where I sat, my back straight, not ashamed of my presence. "I'm not here to fight," I said softly. "I'm not here to beg for your approval. But I've made a life for myself. And it's good. It's real." Her eyes softened. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. She didn't mock me this time. She didn't belittle me. And that, for me, was enough. "I see you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You've always been more than I thought." It wasn't the resolution I had imagined in my head, but it was the one I needed. In that moment, I realized something else. I wasn't here to change her. I was here to change how I saw myself. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was enough just as I was. I walked out of her house that day without feeling the weight of her gaze, without the fear I used to carry. I was free. The business grew. Amelia and Oliver became more than just my family. They were my partners, my friends. And me? I had become something I never thought I'd be. Someone who believed in their own worth. Someone who knew that kindness, even in the darkest moments, could change the world. I had found my seat at the table. But more importantly, I had found myself.